who's just. I had the opportunity to sit and chat with her a little last night, where we met with some Axis leaders and talked with them about what's going on in Catholic-Jewish relations, and really, it's a treat to have Lisa with us. I'm going to give you a little bit about her background, and I'm going to let you do the math.
No math. No math.
No math. Because there's something she said yesterday that I just found unbelievable, because as you will hear, Lisa's been covering the Vatican since around the time of the Vatican II, the Second Vatican Conference, which means that she clearly, they made a tremendous exception in terms of the rules and allowed a 12-year-old to cover, as a professional journalist, the Vatican, because it's really, otherwise the math just doesn't make any sense. Lisa was born in Austria, in Vienna, and grew up in New York City, so you can tell by her accent. She is American Jewish Committee's our representative in Italy and liaison to the Holy See. Works closely with both the Office of Government and International Affairs, which is Jason Isaacson, who we were talking about earlier, and with the AJC's Department of International Interreligious Affairs, headed by David Rosen. We've had the opportunity to have here in Atlanta, and actually he'll be back here in November, but we can talk about that later. Lisa's been with AJC since 2005, after 18 years of working for ADL in the same category as I think David and Lisa came over to AJC around the same time, and it's no wonder. I think their synergy is probably tremendous and really add a lot to our work. In addition to her AJC work, Lisa is a journalist. She's been in Rome and the Vatican correspondent for the Jerusalem Post for many years, and writes freelance for both English language and Italian newspapers and periodicals. She's an accredited member of the Holy See Press Room, as well as the Foreign Press Association of Rome. I can go on and tell you all the different kinds of articles and papers and people she's interviewed, but just so that you know, she has interviewed the current Pope, but before he was the current Pope, and has had the opportunity to meet with and really develop relationships with people at the highest level in terms of Catholic-Jewish relations, and I think also in just in how the Vatican and the Catholic Church operates around the world. And it's a real pleasure to have her in Atlanta.
It's a pleasure to be here. So some persons asked me to explain, before I begin, to explain how I got involved with the Vatican. As you mentioned, I have been writing for the Jerusalem Post since 1965, and I also, almost immediately after I left a teaching position, which brought me to Rome, I began to work for the World Jewish Congress, and they were working with the Vatican because at the time, the big question, the big issue on the table was the production of a document on the Jews, which later became Nostra Aetate, and I'll tell you more about that in case you're not familiar with this. So I began to be interested in the Vatican at that time, and also I met with every Jewish delegation that came to Rome. I interviewed them, and they came to the Pope to see the Pope, and that's how it began. And then there were further steps, my involvement with ADL, and I was the first president of a Christian-Jewish Friendship Association in Rome, and just writing about the Vatican, and then my work with ADL and AJC is how it developed. So I thought I'd give you a kind of a very quick flashback into history of the history of Catholic-Jewish relations, Christian-Jewish relations. Going back to the first centuries of our common era, when Jews and Christians who were to a large extent Jewish converts lived together and until the age of Constantine, when Catholicism, Christianity, became the state religion. And that's when the problems really began. Because although the sacred scriptures of the Christian religion were, if you take them literally, very anti-Jewish, anti-Judaic, and that is a major problem even today, because we must teach, we must induce our Christian friends to teach the Gospels in a historical context, so that it is understood that many of the harsh statements about Jews were said in order to establish the difference between the new religion and the original religion from which it came. It was a competition between two religions, and therefore some of the statements are extraordinarily harsh, but must be placed in the context of the times, because they were speaking to their brothers, almost as if today we would have Orthodox Jewish rabbi speaking, confronting a Reform Jewish rabbi, something like that. I mean, this is the way it was at that time, and the way it should be taught. But since the gospel has been taught through the ages in a very literal context, there has been anti-Semitism through the ages, and sometimes much worse, and other times it was the excuse for pogroms, and of course the culmination of it all was Nazism in World War II. But so our relations go back all those years. At first they were so-so, they were okay, it was almost one people. And then afterwards it began to be differentiated, and then all kinds of things happened. The ghetto of Rome was established in 1555, the first ghetto of the world, and it was kept a ghetto until 1870. The Jews were not persecuted, but they were humiliated. And certain professions were forbidden to them. They were permitted to do old clothes peddling. Actually, the exceptions were that there were some doctors who served some popes, and there were good times and bad times. But in 1555, Jews had to wear yellow badges and with a star on them. This may sound very familiar to you, and the Nazis copied this. And they had curfews, they could go, and so on. In 1870 was the unification of Italy and the reduction of the Vatican State to its present size. Before that, the Vatican had occupied a greater section of Italy. It was reduced to that size, and there was a separation between the church and the state. Italian Jewry has a particular history, as it's always lived in the shadow of the Vatican, and I feel this very strongly in present relations. An example can be the issue over Pius XII, over the beatification of Pius XII, where which is a very complex issue, and it isn't solved, and Jewish leaders feel that the church should wait to beatify him until the secret archives are available to scholars. Now, you may ask, why is the beatification of Pius XII, why should Jews be interested in this? It's an internal Catholic matter. Well, the fact is that saints become models, life models for behavior and for ethical standards. And Jews have so often been a victim of models of behavior in the centuries. And if the Jewish people begin to discover that Pope Pius XII's proverbial silence during World War II about the Jewish persecutions went further than just the silence, while at the same time he was helping Jews to survive, because the Catholic institutions were opened all over the world for Jewish refugees, and many people owe their lives to priests and nuns and religious institutions. The issue is about the fact that he did not speak out. And the Roman Jews have a particular experience with that, because on October 16, 1943, the Nazis came and did a roundup of Jews living in the old ghetto and Jews all over the city of Rome, and they were herded into a prison for 2 days. And during that 2-day period, Pius XII sent his emissary, the Secretary of State, to meet with the German ambassador. And he did ask him to release the Jews. However, the ambassador said to him, well, what would you do if we didn't do so? And the Vatican emissary said, well, we wouldn't want to be faced with this issue. Well, the outcome was that nothing was done, and the Jews were deported. Over 1,000 Jews died. A handful came back from Auschwitz. And so the Roman Jews say, well, if the Pope had spoken out, he might have stopped it, even though he sent an emissary, but he didn't speak out loud. He didn't do anything. Well, the Pope himself, Pope Pius XII himself, is said to have had his concerns over his own behavior. He was in a kind of a Hamlet position. He didn't know whether it would be better to speak out and challenge the Germans. The Vatican, you know, was neutral. It was trying to keep a balance between communism and Stalin and the Nazis. There were Catholic populations all over Europe that were in countries occupied by Nazi Germany. Or whether it was better for him to do behind-the-scenes diplomacy and try to help the Jews, because if he spoke out, he felt, there would be a reaction and the Jews would be deported, the ones that were being hidden and so on. There would no longer be immunity for the Vatican. Well, this is an open issue, but the Roman Jews feel very strongly about it, and among many others in the world. So when Benedict XVI came to visit the Synagogue of Rome last month, there was a heated discussion in the synagogue about whether or not to call off the visit, because just a few weeks earlier, he had moved Pius XII up one step towards beatification, attributing heroic virtues to him. So there was a heated discussion, but in the end, the chief rabbi, the heads of the Rome Jewish community, the Italian Jewish community, decided to confer with the Israeli rabbinate, with rabbis all over the world, and it was decided it was much more important to keep the dialogue going and to honor Benedict XVI, who made a very beautiful speech at the synagogue, while the head of the Jewish community also made a very good speech. His own family had been saved by nuns who have been honored at Yad Vashem, and he brought this up. But he said, and there was a member of the community of the nuns sitting in the audience who was honored. And at the same time, he said, however, this was not the same fate for many other Jews. It would have been good if more had been done publicly. And he inferred the question of Pope Pius XII's silence. So this was a recent happening. I'll do a fast forward to the 20th century, and I want to speak briefly about the parallel development of reconciliation on a religious level and on a political level. So on a political level, in 1903, Theodor Herzl went to visit Pius XII, and he wanted to present to him the arguments in favor of political Zionism, of the creation of a Jewish homeland. Well, the Pope replied, I'm sorry, but we cannot favor this creation of a Jewish state because you are people who have not recognized Jesus Christ, our Lord, so we cannot recognize a Jewish state. So that was the position. There was a theological bias against the state, the creation of the State of Israel, that continued for many years. When it was subdued, another factor came into the picture. You know that the diplomatic relations between Israel and the Holy See took place only in 1993. Until that period, there were no diplomatic relations. There were contacts, but no formal diplomatic relations. And every Jewish delegation that came to see the Pope would mention this and would ask the Pope to recognize Israel. Well, what was the reason behind this? It was mainly concern for the Christian populations in Arab countries. They feared retaliation. And this was very clear when in 1993 the fundamental agreement between Israel and the Holy See was signed, and the spokesman for the Vatican press room said, well, to questions about how come you're recognizing Israel now, they said, well, at this moment there have been peace talks between the Palestinians and the Israelis in Madrid. So if they can recognize Israel, we must recognize Israel. So that came about in 1993. Now, through the years, there are I'd like to just share with you some humorous incidents regarding this non-recognition of Israel. In 1973, the Israeli Philharmonic performed for Pius XII. And the official Vatican newspaper had to report the event, but he couldn't say it was the Israeli Philharmonic. So he wrote, Jewish musicians from 48 different countries have performed for His Holiness. So that was the way of getting around that. And there was always an avoidance of mentioning the state of Israel until Good Friday in 1984, when John Paul II broke this tradition and pronounced an apostolic letter in which he spoke of the state of Israel and our desire for its peace and security, and our desire at the same time for a Palestinian homeland. So that was the breakthrough. There are many other amusing incidents. I mean, when Golda Meir went to visit the Pope, the Vatican spokesman went out of his way to describe the good relations that the Vatican has with all these Arab countries, and he listed them. And he also said this visit was neither planned nor programmed, it just came about. So it was, and so now I go back to the Arab factor when I go to the religious aspect. The religious aspect, the history of the reconciliation goes back to World War II and shortly after that, when the French historian and Holocaust survivor Jules Isaac went to visit John the 23rd, and bringing with him a stack of papers that he had written, which was called the teaching of contempt. And he was referring to church teaching through the years that had described Jews as accursed people, people not wanted by God, people who refused to recognize Christ, and therefore also a deicide people. The word deicide was a terrible factor in the history of our people. And John the 23rd, who had seen what was happening in World War II and who had helped Jews also, helped save Jews, decided that something had to be done about this, to reform, to make clear that official Catholic teaching was not of this sort. So the idea came to him of calling a Second Vatican Council. There had been one centuries earlier. This was a Vatican Council that would call together all the bishops of the world to reform doctrine of the church, to bring it up to date. He called it aggiornamento, bringing it up to date. And a large factor in his program was a so-called document on the Jews. And this document on the Jews then evolved into what is known as Nostra Aetate, which means our times. The document was not only on the Jews, it also included a section on Islam, a section on other religions in the world, and a section on non-believers. And Nostra Aetate actually completely turned over our relations, made the accusation of deicide completely illegitimate, because it says neither the Jews at the time of Jesus, and even less so the Jews of today, can be held responsible for the death of Christ. And at the same time, it had a statement against anti-Semitism. But this statement betrays the political pressures that the church was under. First of all, it did not condemn anti-Semitism, it deplored anti-Semitism. And at the same time, it prefaced the statement of its deploration of anti-Semitism, which the church, it said, not for political reasons, but for pure humanitarian concerns, deplores anti-Semitism. So this not for political reasons was obviously a reference, an attempt to calm the Arab reactions to a document of this sort, who were in alarm over the state of Israel at the time, 1965. So this became the basis of our present relations, and these relations have traveled from formal relations with just relations that were called on certain dates. When something wanted to be made known, there was no direct communication. The Jewish community, the different agencies would have to make a paid ad in a paper to say, we deplore this or that, we protest against this or that. This gradually changed, and contacts became ever closer and more familiar, and today we are at the stage where we pick up a phone or we write an email or we meet someone in the various departments of the Vatican. At the beginning it was restricted to the Commission for Religious Relations with Jews. which was under the auspices of Cardinal Bea, who was the main address for this document on the Jews during the council. And his council for promoting Christian unity he was the head of this, and the Commission for Religious Relations with Jews was housed and still is housed in this building, and it's part of the unification the unification of Christianity, for Christian unity. But the meaning should not be interpreted as an attempt to convert Jews, even though we are well aware that it is a theological hope that at the end of time, so-called eschatological hope, as they call it, Jews will be united with Christianity. But as long as there are no overt attempts at trying to convert the other, we accept this because it's part of their theology. The reason for this commission being part of the Council for Christian Unity is twofold. One of them is for historical reasons because of Cardinal Bea, and the second is because the Catholic Church considers Judaism closer to the Catholic Church than any other religion. In fact, Islam is housed in the building that houses the Council for Interreligious Dialogue, as well as all the other religions. So we have this special relationship. A way was set up for regular meetings between the Catholic Church, the Vatican, and representatives of Jewish organizations. And it's an umbrella organization of which AJC is part, and which Rabbi David Rosen presided over for 4 years. And it's called IJKIC, the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations. And they've had meetings about many topics, about common moral issues, about the meaning of the land, which was very important because it brought home the fact that Jews consider Israel a religious land, that we have a religious right to the land. And there were papers published on this. And recently, there was a meeting in South Africa and in Argentina, and there have been common projects to fight AIDS, common work together. So there are regular meetings of this commission, and there are other 2 commissions that bring us together. And one of them is the commission, the religious commission of the Israeli Chief Rabbinate and the Vatican Holy See Commission for political reasons. And Rabbi Rosen again is on that. He is he's on all the committees. He's an advisor to that group. And they meet, no, excuse me, it's not political. They meet on religious issues. I made a mistake. The political aspect is the bilateral commission between the State of Israel and the Holy See, which was formed in 1993, and which was to work out the details of the fundamental agreement that was signed by both parties then. And there are some issues that are still on the table that should have been solved years ago. And the main issue on the table at the moment is still the issue of taxes for the Catholic Church in Israel and the legal standing of the church, the official legal standing. The tax issues are very complicated, but what makes things even more complicated is that Israeli bureaucracy keeps changing, and that different people are in charge of this commission every so often, and word doesn't go down. Well, bureaucracy isn't just an Israeli problem. It's a major problem in the Vatican, and I will come to that in a minute, because that is the main issue behind recent problems that have come up. I'd like to say that our relationship has always been moving forward, but it's been like 2 steps forward and 1 step backward, and then 2 steps forward again and 1 step backward. And some of the issues in the past that have disturbed our relationship was the years when the Carmelite nuns had a convent in Auschwitz. And Jewish people thought that this was not fair and it wasn't right to the victims, because the huge majority of the victims of Auschwitz were Jewish, of course, over 90%. And the nuns were praying for all the victims, but it seemed like a Christianization of the Holocaust. And they wouldn't move. They thought they were doing the good thing. But Jewish protest rose to such a high pitch that John Paul II made an unprecedented move, and he ordered the nuns to leave. They left. Another issue was the beatification of Edith Stein, who as a role model, again, was problematic for Jews because she was born a Jew and she died as a Jew or a Catholic. We don't know. No. So the role model would be that the perfect Jew and the Jew to worship is the Jew who becomes Christian. And that was the problem with Edith Stein. There have been other things. There was the beatification of Pius IX, who was responsible for abducting a Jewish child from the Jewish family because a servant had baptized her in secret, and therefore she was Catholic. This was a major issue in the 19th century, and it was a worldwide issue, but the Pope won out. He never returned to his family and became a very distinguished priest, as a matter of fact. So there have been all these issues, and we speak to each other, and sometimes when it's very serious, we manage to have our way. Other times, as in these issues, we don't. But the dialogue continues. And the religious relations have gone into education, where we have produced material. Both the American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League, and some others as well, have produced some very good material about how to teach the gospel in context, and that's very important. And every new generation has to be taught, because otherwise anti-Semitism will just flourish again, because if you read the Gospels without interpretation, it's almost the same as reading the Bible without interpretation. It becomes literal and you get the wrong idea of things, right? As a matter of fact, there was a project at the Vatican where they wanted to revive interest in the Bible, and they had Bible reading for 48 hours. Everybody was called on to read a passage. I was called on too, and I thought to myself, well, you know, what will they get out of this? Because it's very complex. Well, the Gospels in particular. So we have these issues of education, and the Vatican is beginning to ask for reciprocity, because in Jewish schools you don't have much education about the Catholic religion, and especially in Israel they want that. So that is one thing. Through the I wanted to say this, that the John Paul II's papacy brought some incredible strides forward in our relationship, and he was, as you know, he was a charismatic figure, and he knew how to orchestrate an event. He also had, he was an actor. His background was, he was an actor in a small town where half the population practically was Jewish, and he had Jewish friends, and he had great sensitivity. And the first thing that he did that brought world attention was his visit to the Rome synagogue in 1986, when he addressed Jews as our dearly beloved elder brothers. And this was broadcast all over the world, and it certainly influenced Catholic attitudes to Judaism at that time. And after that, of course, his monumental visit to Israel, and as an old man, sick and trembling, his steps to the Western Wall with a prayer, which was a request for forgiveness for the sins against the Jewish people through the centuries. And he had said this, he had pronounced this prayer in the Vatican before he left, this was, of course, a very moving event. Also, it was under his papacy that relations with Israel were established. And in 1982, he proclaimed anti-Semitism as a sin against God and against man. So that is certainly a step forward from Nostra Aetate, from the years before. The papacy of John Paul II was very special. And as I said, he was a Pole, and he grew up in Poland with many Jewish friends, and he, of course, saw what the Germans had done, what the Nazis had done. So we move on to Benedict XVI, a German Pope, who is very conscious of his German background. And I'll add just here as a side comment, when we honored Cardinal Casper at the annual meeting. Cardinal Casper is still the head of the Commission for Religious Relations with Jews at the Vatican. When we honored him, he gave a very moving speech, and he said, you know, I had very mixed feelings in taking up this position because I was worried that I would not be accepted as a German. He said this, and we had never mentioned anything like that, but obviously it was on his mind. So it was on the mind of Benedict XVI as well. And he wanted to make it clear from the very start that this had nothing to do with his papacy, that he was against the Nazis. He made several speeches in which he mentioned the horrors of Nazism. And one of his first actions was two things. He sent telegrams to prominent rabbis who had been in touch with John Paul II and whom he knew as well, including Rabbi David Rosen and including the chief rabbi of Rome. And then he went to visit a synagogue in Germany. So those were his first acts. His commitment to good relations with Jews and to a theological understanding with Judaism is unquestionable. And as you said, I interviewed him in 1990, and that's very clear in the interview because I interviewed him about his position on Jews and Judaism in the Universal Catechism. And he made it very clear that he felt that, that all references to the Pharisees were as teachers, and he stressed the bonds between us. He's grown since then. His positions have become more modern. He was a bit antiquated at the time, but positions have become more modern. And so that he has made errors in his papacy, for which he's apologized. He's apologized so many times. And I attribute this to the fact that he has called to his service priests who do not have a diplomatic background. In fact, the Secretary of State, Cardinal Bertone, does not come from the diplomatic school of the Vatican, where most Secretaries of State come from. He is a pastoral priest. And I think that he doesn't have the top advisors for him in his actions. And also, there are certainly conflicting elements in the Vatican today, liberal and conservative and reactionary, who fight with each other. And they fight for power. And there is no one to really control all of this. And communication doesn't really get through. That's why I said Israel isn't the only bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy in the Vatican needs a lot of adjusting. And it's obvious that he isn't even informed about everything. Recently, the Italian press made evident that he had not been informed about a certain inner scandal that was taking place between top levels of the Vatican, and where the Pope should have been able to take a position, but he didn't know the facts. So I'd like to just mention that he doesn't do this only with Jews. He does this with, he did this with Islam. And when he went in September 2006, which was close to the beginning of his papacy, he went to visit the Regensburg University in Germany. And he wanted to speak about faith and reason and the balance between faith and reason. And he quotes a medieval Christian emperor as saying to his Islamic partner in dialogue, a dialogue between Islam and Christianity, he said to the Persian emperor, he said, "Show me just what Muhammad had brought that was new, and there you will find only evil and inhuman things, such as his command to spread the faith he preached by the sword." Now, can you imagine? That's a very strong statement. And the conclusion that he said, the moral of the story was that violence is incompatible with the nature of God and the nature of the human soul. Well, this is a statement that he could have said without casting this terrible light on all of Islam. And it seemed as if he was referring to all of Islam. So the next day, there were outbreaks of violence in different countries in the Islamic world. And unfortunately, there were deaths as well. And the Pope was really taken aback by all of this. And he apologized. He modified his statements. He said he didn't mean it this way, and so on. And then soon after that, a major conference was called between Muslim leaders and the Vatican, and things are going much better now. But this is just an example of the kind of thing that he has done. And in relation to Judaism, well, you must know the story of Williamson, the Holocaust-denying bishop, who was a member of the group called the Lefebvrists, named after Cardinal Marcel Lefebvre, who was a cardinal who refused to accept the Vatican Council and its documents. Therefore, he refused to accept Nostra Aetate. And so the Pope, John Paul II, I think it was at the time, had excommunicated him and his group. And he continued to create bishops who were not recognized by the Church. Well, years have gone by, and this present Pope wants very much to reintegrate the conservative wing of the Church into the main Church. And so he has made overtures to this group, which, by the way, I think the Vatican has not done enough research on this, because they are anti-Semitic. Their literature is anti-Semitic. They speak of the Jews as a deicide people. And but Williamson was the worst, because he was obviously a Holocaust-denying priest. He had granted an interview to the Swedish TV in which he said the Holocaust never took place. So when this burst open onto the scene, the press brought it out after the Pope had decided to lift the excommunication, not integrate them yet into the Church, because that depends on their accepting the Vatican II, which they have not done. But he wanted to lift the excommunication. So when this happened, a big scandal broke out, and the Pope had to admit that he hadn't known about this. He didn't know about Williamson, and his people hadn't done a proper job. And they should get more acquainted with internet. They should latch onto blogs. They should learn more. And he really apologized. And the commission that had been responsible for research on the Lefebvres is called Ecclesia Dei, very, very conservative, to put it mildly. And they had been independent, and they were, after this incident, they were integrated under the auspices of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the, let's say, with regard to theology, it's the policeman of the Vatican, and it used to be the place where the Inquisition was commanded, and it's been turned into the Council for the Doctrine of the Faith. And the present Pope, when he was a cardinal, Cardinal Ratzinger, was the president of this council. However, it's still not working as it should, because we had another issue. We had an issue over the revival of the pre-Vatican II Tridentine Latin Mass, which means the Mass that was accepted at the Council of Trent in the 16th century. This had been cast aside and permitted only for very few people when in 1970, after the Vatican Council, because a new Mass had been written, a modernized Mass, and a prayer that was very ugly with relation to the Jews, which was called For the Conversion of the Jews, and it depicted Jews as blindfolded and groping around in the darkness because they didn't recognize Jesus Christ. One very derogatory description had been removed already by John the 23rd, and that was a reference to perfidious Jews, which actually in Latin does not mean what it means in English or in other. It means Jews who don't believe. Perfidious means non-believing. But when it's translated into the vernacular, of course, it takes on another meaning, and it took on another meaning for all the Catholic populations. That was removed after John the 23rd's meeting with Jules Isaac. He removed it. However, the prayer was still unacceptable. So Benedict XVI, when he revived this Mass to please the traditionalists within the Church and permit them to have their Mass in Latin, he rewrote this prayer, and he could easily have taken the contemporary prayer for the Jews, which is a very nice prayer, said on Good Friday, nothing really seriously wrong with it, except for the hopes that the Jews will eventually see the light. But it's an acceptable reference. It's a prayer for the Jews, for the future of the Jews. And but he didn't want to use that. He wanted to use the original and modify it to please the traditionalists without offending the Jews. So he actually had his Secretary of State communicate with the Israeli chief rabbinate to ask them if this was okay. Reluctantly, they accepted, but they said the title should be for the Jews, not for the conversion of the Jews. Absolutely, that will be done. And on all levels, when we had contacts, this seemed to be the case. And then very recently, there was a meeting of IJKIK, and I was part of the delegation with the Vatican. And we were again saying, well, when is this new issue coming out of the Mass, the revised edition? And they said, oh, don't worry, we're working on it, and it'll be all right. And even the Secretary of State said to us, I know that this is what the Pope promised it should be. Well, he was not aware of the fact that the book had already been published. I discovered it a few days later. And the title of the prayer was For the Conversion of the Jews. So now we're being told that a new edition will soon come out, and this will be fixed. So this was one of the issues. Another issue that's coming up is the Synod of Bishops of the Middle East. The Middle East Synod of Bishops, which is which will gather bishops from the Middle East all over. We've seen the draft of the of this meeting, and so has Israel's ambassador to the Holy See, and there have been contacts. We've been concerned about it because only Israel is singled out for political considerations, whereas no other country is. And there we have a very difficult issue because, again, the Vatican is concerned about the fate of Christian minorities. They don't even speak out against the persecution of Christians in the Arab countries. They don't say it specifically. They try to keep up the good relations and keep this in the background. Well, this attitude of the Vatican is evident in how it has handled the pedophile scandals, because it has been for centuries the practice of the Catholic Church to treat any problems related to the Catholic Church within its walls. In other words, there is a canonic law, which is Vatican law, and any problems of misbehavior, any internal problems should be treated by these internal courts. And they're actually, they request priests and nuns to make a vow of silence about these to the outside world. And that's the answer why so few of these pedophile cases were reported to the public authorities and to the police in these years. Well, they've realized that this cannot go on, and the Pope issued a new paper in which he says that this must be broken, and any cases that are discovered from now on must be reported to the police in whatever country they take place, and must be handled through criminal law, not just within the Vatican. Now, the reaction to these pedophile scandals, which disrupted an already difficult structure of non-communication within the Church and different factions not coming to terms with each other, the reaction has been in two different directions. One of them is an honest reaction, the search for seeking penitence, for facing the issues, for meeting the victims, and being completely forthright and honest from now on. And they believe that this, and these people believe that this is the only way to purify the Church and to keep people attached to the Church, because their main problem is, their main concern is to lose the Catholic faithful, not that they won't go to church anymore. The second reaction is they go into denial, and it's looking for a scapegoat, looking for who is persecuting the Church. And there is a small minority, but it's present within the Vatican as well as outside, mostly older people, who are reactionary and who still consider the Jews as part of a conspiracy against the church. So when the Osservatore Romano and the Avvenire, the main Catholic paper of Italy, write articles and they say, well, this media attention to these scandals is really exaggerated. There's so much pedophilia in the world and we're just a small minority, ignoring the fact that even if they are a small minority, granted that they might be, they should represent a moral authority. So therefore, it's not the same as all the others. Well, they say that there's been a media attack against them, and the media, in their mind, is connected to Jews because the New York Times and various other papers and media people who are so prominent. So they say it's a media attack supported by those who hate the church and those who don't accept our bioethics, you know, same-sex marriages, abortion, and so on. And they also included the Masons. And let me tell you that the Masons, at the time of Vatican II, when I was in the offices of the World Jewish Congress, there was a book distributed to the bishops attending the Vatican Council that was called The Plot Against the Church, Jews, Masons, and Communists. So it's very often associated one with the other. So these things have been entering the media on a subliminal level without ever mentioning Jews. But recently there was a direct attack, and it was not by a mainstream bishop, but it was by a bishop who had retired, the archbishop of a small town in Italy, Grosseto. His name is Babini. But on a blog called Pontifex, that journalists look at because it provides interesting information. It's a reactionary Catholic blog representing a small minority of Catholic people, but there it is. And they interviewed Babini, and Babini said, oh, well, this is a plot. The media, the Jewish media and the Masons, they're against the church. And besides, even if we speak about the Holocaust, the Jews are our enemies. They're deicide people. And if we speak about the Holocaust, yes, it was wrong. It was terrible. But you have to remember that the Jews were strangling Germany economically, and they were usurers. Well, this was really too much to take without official reaction. So AJC made a public declaration, and we got in touch with Monsignor Vincenzo Paglia, who is a good friend both of myself and of Rabbi David Rosen for many years, founder of a wonderful Catholic community called the Community of St. Egidio. And he has just retired, retired as the ecumenical and interreligious director of the Catholic Bishops' Conference. The new one has not yet been instated. So he could speak with authority, and he stated to us that this is completely, Babini's statements were completely outside and inadmissible outside the realm of official Catholic teaching. And after that, they convinced Bishop Babini to say he had never said all this. You know, he denied what he had said. Now he has to deal with the journalist who interviewed him because he's saying, no, I have it on tape, and so this is an ongoing thing. But however, it was very important to have this official statement to put things in order. So the conclusion is that we have really, I must say, despite all of this, these issues, we really have wonderful relations. We have very good friends. We have widespread contacts on educational levels. We have youth meetings. There was a wonderful youth meeting between Catholic and Jewish young people at, outside Rome last summer, an official meeting, and they're still in contact with each other. And the grassroots level has expanded enormously, as you probably are aware of. In America, there are so many Catholic-Jewish discussion groups and so on. So this is all wonderful progress and a tremendous difference from the past. And at the same time, we have to be careful to keep our eye on these incidents that happen. And also, we have to be aware that if the next Pope will come from the continent of Africa or the continent of Latin America, he will have less of a historical knowledge, a sense of what happened in World War II, and he will probably also have almost no awareness of the importance of teaching the Gospels in context. So there we have to be ready to communicate and to see that things go the right way. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. The question is about the management of the holy sites in Israel and whether the Vatican would not be interested in Israel maintaining its autonomy over its rule over the holy sites. Well, the Vatican for a long at first it had demanded internationalization of the city of Jerusalem. It dropped that. That was many years ago. Now they would like to have like an international authority over the holy sites, because they don't really want any one state to have authority over the holy sites. They feel it's an international, it's a universal concern, and political conditions might change in the future, and they would like to see like a kind of a UN or an EU or whatever, to have different international authorities present in the old city. That's their position. And a lot of work on the most controversial questions of the holy sites, which include inner Christian conflict. You must know that. A lot of that is being discussed by religious leaders in the neighboring countries, in Israel, Palestinian, Jordan, and both Rabbi Rosen and his wife Sharon Rosen are involved in this, in meetings of this sort. And a lot of progress has actually been made by the religious leaders themselves, who often conduct a kind of a parallel diplomacy, which is to the benefit of all. I'd like to mention in this context something I mentioned last night about the community of Sant'Egidio, who came to being in 1968, and after the Pope had organized an interreligious prayer, the first one that the Catholic Church ever organized in 1986 in Assisi, they decided to have annual meetings of religious leaders from different countries all over the world, of the world's major religions, of all of them. And at one of these meetings where I regularly go, Rabbi David Rosen regularly goes, and he invited a Muslim leader from Egypt to come and visit Israel. And this Muslim leader accepted. And he came back the next year to report on his visit to Israel. And he said it was a really good thing. I would advise many Muslims to go, because I was told not to go by my brothers, but I said to them, well, an invitation is sacred, and Rabbi David Rosen invited me, and he will take care of me. And I came to Israel, and I met so many Jews who speak Arabic, and there was such a good feeling between us. So it was a wonderful result. And very often you have meetings, I'll take Iran as an example, where there are meetings between religious leaders of these countries, even when there are no diplomatic relations between them. And so this serves a very good purpose, and we call it parallel diplomacy, even though the community of Sant'Egidio says, please don't say that, because the Vatican doesn't like that. So I'm saying this informally now. It's an informal way of describing it. What is the defining point of 1870? 1870 is a very interesting year, because it was the unification of Italy. It was the fight within Italy. It was a unification, so the barriers were broken. And interestingly enough, it was also the year when the Vatican decided to rule on papal infallibility. It was the same year. It was as late as that the Pope's decisions on moral issues were infallible because he was inspired by God. It was the same year. And so 1870 was the breakdown of the ghetto, and very slowly people moved out, Jewish people moved out into neighboring areas and moved out to different professions which had been denied to them before. And from old clothes peddlers, they put up stands and they sold clothes in markets, and then they opened shops. And then the next generation, as always happens, went to school, went to universities, became professionals, and so on. And that was the beginning. All right. The question is whether there's a shift in Vatican structure, and there's a decrease in the number of Catholics that go to church in Europe, and what would the future be like with an African or a Latin American Pope? Well, you know, the Vatican, they will say very openly, is not a democratic structure. It's a hierarchical structure. So although there has been an increasing demand by cardinals to implement the doctrine of collegiality, which was supposed to have been implemented after Vatican II, more inner discussion and more decision-making by the cardinals. They're demanding this. As far as the composition of the synods go, well, many conservative priests were ordained as cardinals by John Paul II already. And there is quite a substantial number of the conservative wing in among the cardinals of the world who will be voting for the next pope. Benedict XVI has continued with this path. And there are many African bishops and there are many Latin American bishops. So it's quite possible that, especially in Latin America, where the church is having a lot of problems with the evangelical movements, that they will want to have someone from this area of the world to become the next pope. I'll just add that, yes, there are less people going to church, and mostly older people. And in Europe itself, in Germany, for example, there's a lot of contestation of the church. There's been a demand for married priests, which the Pope continues to refuse, and a greater role for women in the church. So there's a lot of ferment. In Italy, the church has more power, I think, than in any other country, because it also influences the politicians who bow down to the Vatican wishes because they want the votes of the people, not because they're convinced, in many instances. How does this affect our relations with the church? Well, I think very little. If you discount this anti-Semitic problem, which has to be kept under control, I think very little on the whole, because Jewish people are very perceptive, and they have caught the genuineness of Benedict XVI. If you've ever met him, as so many of us have, you would realize that he is extremely direct in his communication. He's not a charismatic figure, he is not a media man, but on a personal level, he's very, very sincere. And the first time that we met with him right after his election, he didn't sit in his chair waiting for people to come up to meet him. He stepped down and went over to each person, shook his hand, and was in no hurry to move on to the next person. It seemed as if he had all the time in the world. So this perception, I think Jewish people are very sensitive to to sizing up a person this way. And they feel that he's very genuine, and they feel that he has the best intentions. They have problems with him when he comes up with some kind, when he, excuse me, I don't want to be disrespectful, but when he puts his foot in his mouth, they have problems with that. But, and the pedophile scandals don't affect our relations, because we, amongst all people, realize what harm generalizations can do. So we are able to select the good people from those who are not. And we consider that it's important to deal on a person-to-person basis. And with the reforms that the Vatican is enacting with regard to the pedophile scandals, it looks as if, it looks optimistic. They have a lot of work to do, but it looks optimistic. How would I characterize the Catholic-Jewish relations on the college level? Well, you know, I'm not too familiar with, I don't know why you specified Jesuit. Is there a specific problem with Jesuit?
Catholic universities.
Catholic universities, all right. I'm not very familiar with the American scene.
Okay.
But I can tell you that in Italy, For example, the Pontifical Gregorian University has a center for, Cardinal Bea's Center for Jewish Studies. And it's a wonderful relationship. It's a Jesuit university. And there are wonderful relationships there. And I should think that, especially in America, I would imagine that the teachings of Vatican II have permeated to the level of the students and the teachers, that they would pay some attention to the Vatican II documents. So,
and a different question, proselytizing.
Proselytizing. Well, the Catholic Church, almost, I would say almost 100%, does not proselytize. The evangelicals do, but the Catholics do not. They feel that by giving an example, they have to give an example. They have to testify to their faith, and this is up to the person who observes it, how strong their own convictions are, but there's no proselytizing. No. The question about the beatification of Pius XII, it was moved one step further, and I don't know, one might feel that this was a step that the Pope felt he had to take because he has a lot of pressure on him. And a lot of the criticism of his not having done so is actually leveled against Jewish pressure on the Vatican. And I think he wanted to pacify, let's say, both the conservative wing of the Church and those who have feelings that the Jewish people are impeding this. But there are also Catholic people who are impeding the beatification. Well, the question is this. We are hoping that the Vatican will now wait for any further steps until the Vatican archives will be available to scholars so that more can be said about the papacy itself. And we may discover things that are very much in his favor, because it's not a black and white issue, as I said. It's whether he spoke, whether his decision not to speak was the correct decision. But the Church did help Jews all over the world, and especially in Italy. Many thousands of Jews were saved through the priests and nuns.
But less so in Germany.
Maybe less so in Germany. It was an individual decision. It was not, there's nothing written that we can find where the Pope actually said this. But he also did not issue a statement against Nazi persecutions, not just of Jews, but in general, in Poland, because he had meant to do so, and the local bishop said, no, we're going to do more harm with this than good. And then there was the famous case in Holland when the Dutch bishops had made a statement against the persecutions, and the next day the Nazis rounded up the Jews who had converted to Catholicism, and they deported them. So they were worried. He was worried about what would happen. And I must add, it was probably not his main concern. His main concern was to fight both communism and Nazism. They were equal enemies to him. That was his main concern. And something that has not been stressed until recently is that he didn't make any statement about the Holocaust even after the war, which is a bit disturbing. But again, the Vatican archives have to be opened, and it will take 4 or 5 more years because there are millions of documents that have to be ordered so that the Church can keep control over them. And therefore, although it's not our concern directly whether he be beatified or not, as I said before, it's our concern in the sense that we have a friendship going. And Rabbi David Rosen often says that in a friendship, you're expected to be sensitive to your partner's sensitivities. So we're hoping in that. And I suppose that if a beatification actually takes place before the archives are opened, it will be a major issue. Whereas if he waits, then maybe things can calm down a little bit and more can be known. Maybe he won't be beatified. We don't know. But we don't have any power to do anything except that when Jewish groups go to see the Pope, they will say, we also hope that you will wait for the beatification. And they repeat this every time, as they used to repeat.
At least until the archives are open.
Until the archives are open. In the same way as they used to repeat, we hope you will recognize Israel. And that was done until it happened. So, okay?
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.